Hello.
I remember that morning so clearly, as if it were just yesterday. It was one of those days where the sun had already begun to climb high into the sky, but the air still carried a bit of coolness, just enough to make me shiver slightly as I adjusted the collar of my dress. Not that it mattered much. I had planned everything down to the smallest detail. I was excited, really. After all, this was going to be the day I would finally be part of my daughter's life again, or so I had thought. I put on the dress I'd worn so many times before, the one that was simple but made me feel comfortable. I wore my shoes, polished just enough to make me feel like I belonged in the world I was about to enter. It wasn't a fancy dress, not like what you'd see at a grand party, but it was my own. I chose it carefully, even though it didn't match the world my daughter had surrounded herself with, her gleaming house, her fancy friends, her world that seemed so far removed from mine. I had a gift, of course, a blanket I had crocheted myself, made with my own 2 hands. I hadn't made one in years, but this time was different. This blanket wasn't just wool and thread. It was my love, my memories, my everything wrapped in white soft threads. It was a gift for my granddaughter, my first little one, and I couldn't wait to see her. I packed the gift in a box and placed it carefully on the passenger seat of my old car. The long drive from my little house to theirs wasn't something I minded. I'd driven this route many times, but today for some reason it felt like the distance between us was more than just miles. Maybe it was the excitement of finally seeing my daughter. Maybe it was the quiet hope that things would change. I told myself over and over that this would be different. As I approached their house, the familiar discomfort started creeping in. The street looked almost too perfect, too manicured, too pristine, too rich. The kind of place I'd never really belonged to. My daughter, my pride, had made it. The big house, the fancy cars, this was her dream, and I had helped make it real. Or so I thought. I pulled into the driveway, just as I saw strangers' cars lined up outside. It was a strange thing to notice, but something in me shifted, a knot tightening in my stomach. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that maybe they were just friends of hers, visiting for the baby shower. But when I stepped out of the car, I saw them all, clad in fine clothes, glasses of champagne in hand, laughing and chatting like they had all the time in the world. My daughter's life had become something I couldn't recognize. I approached the door, the faint sound of music and chatter reaching my ears, and something deep inside told me that I wasn't supposed to be here. But no matter what, I couldn't turn back now. I had driven so far. For her. For them. The moment the door opened, I saw her. My daughter, Candace. She looked radiant, glowing like she was the star of the show. There was a kind of warmth around her, a sparkle I hadn't seen in years. It took me back, and for a second I believed everything was going to be okay. She would be happy to see me. She would embrace me like she did when she was younger. But then it all shifted. Our eyes met. And what I saw in hers wasn't warmth. It wasn't joy. It was panic. It was the kind of look you give when you see something you can't control, something you wish would just go away. She froze. Her eyes widened, her smile faded, and all at once, she was no longer the daughter I remembered. She started moving toward me, but it wasn't with excitement. No, it was with urgency, as though she needed to get me away from her. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice so low it almost seemed like a hiss. I was confused. I had just driven 600 miles to surprise her, to be part of her life again. "I just came for the shower, Candace. I wanted to see you and the baby." My voice trailed off as she pulled me toward the porch. Her grip on my arm was so tight, it almost hurt. She was angry, so angry that I didn't even know what to say. "Look at you. What are you wearing?" she sneered, her face twisted in a way I had never seen before. "You look ridiculous. This is my day, my baby shower. Do you know what people will think?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't even looking at me anymore, just at my clothes, my simple dress, my unpolished shoes. Her face was full of disdain, as though I was a burden to her happiness, as though everything I had ever done for her didn't matter. Then just like that, a man in a black suit appeared behind her. His face said everything without saying a word. He had been waiting for this moment, I could tell. My daughter didn't even look at him. She just nodded, and he stepped forward, offering his hand. "Ma'am," he said, voice calm but firm. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I was rooted to the spot. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just stared at them standing in front of me, taking away everything I thought we had. Everything I thought I was doing right. And there I stood, a stranger in my own daughter's life, with nothing but a wrapped-up blanket in my hands. She didn't even say goodbye. No, it wasn't a goodbye at all. It was a silent condemnation, a realization that in her eyes I was no longer worth having around. And as I walked away humiliated, I felt a part of me die. A few days had passed since I was escorted out of my daughter's baby shower. The world I had once longed to be part of, to witness and share in, had been torn apart with one cruel gesture. And while it was easy to get lost in the whirlwind of my emotions, to drown in my heartbreak, I knew I had no time for that. I wasn't going to cry or fall apart. No, instead I sat quietly at home in my cozy corner. The same space that had always brought me peace. But today this peace felt hollow. The birds still sang outside and the trees still swayed, but I no longer felt like part of it. Her words echoed in my mind. You look ridiculous. You're ruining everything. Those words that sliced into my heart like a knife. And yet, I wasn't going to let them be my downfall. No, the heartache was there, but now so was something else. Something much stronger. It was a quiet, simmering resolve. The moment I was thrown out of their celebration, I understood that I would never be a part of their world. Instead of falling apart, I chose something else. Something they would not see coming. I wasn't a woman who would scream or lash out. I had spent too many years holding things together, keeping peace where there was none. But I had learned something invaluable in all my quiet years of service. Sometimes the most powerful act is not what others expect. Sometimes revenge is not a loud, violent outcry, but a quiet, calculated decision. I began my plan. There was no room for hesitation. The first thing I did was reach for the old papers, the ones I had filed away years ago. The mortgage documents for their dream house. The one I had co-signed. I took a deep breath, my fingers trembling slightly as I flipped through them. My signature was there, still fresh in my mind, the signature that had been a mark of my sacrifice. All these years I had supported them quietly, selflessly. But now that sacrifice, that trust had been betrayed. I pulled out the mortgage agreement and began reading it again carefully. It wasn't the first time I had gone through these papers, but it was the first time I saw them through the lens of what had just happened. I hadn't noticed before, but there it was, a clause buried in the fine print. One the bank manager had mentioned in passing when I signed. If the relationship between borrower and guarantor me was irreparably damaged, the loan could be called in. I could legally withdraw my support. I could break it all down one piece at a time. For a moment I sat there staring at the page. The enormity of what I could do settled into me. I wasn't just a co-signer. I was their foundation. I had made this home possible, and without me, without my signature, everything they had could come crashing down. I pushed those thoughts aside, careful not to let excitement overtake my sense of calm. I needed to act deliberately, methodically. No drama, no confrontation, just a quiet, calculated decision. I took the phone from the table and dialed the number I had memorized, the bank's risk management department. As I waited for the call to connect, I could feel my heart beating in my chest, but I kept my voice steady when the line finally picked up. I gave them the details, my name, the loan number, and of course the part that mattered most. I explained with complete clarity that my relationship with the borrowers had been severely damaged. I told them what had happened, how my daughter had dismissed me from her home with disdain, how I had been publicly humiliated in front of her friends. The person on the other end didn't say much at first, just took the information. Typed, I imagine. When she did speak, her voice was still polite, but with the distinct note of someone who had heard something significant. Yes, Mrs. Sinclair, this is serious, she said after a long pause. I will escalate this to the appropriate department. I didn't need to hear more. I knew what was coming next. I could almost picture the bank's risk assessment team going through their algorithm, pulling up the facts and realizing, just as I had, that without my financial backing, their world would crumble. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of release. It wasn't the kind of relief you feel when you cry and let out all your pain. It was the kind of release that comes from a clear, irreversible action. And now I had made my move. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had thought I was weak, that I would always be there for her no matter what. But she had forgotten one thing. I was not a woman to be underestimated. The next morning, I received a letter from the bank. The words on the page were what I had been waiting for. It was official, their loan was now at risk. It would be reevaluated. The entire loan was under scrutiny. For a moment I sat back in my chair, the letter in my hands. I imagined them, Candace and Preston, sitting in their grand house, perhaps smiling over a glass of wine, completely oblivious to the storm that was coming, to the reality that their perfect life, built on my sacrifices, was about to fall apart. I wasn't done yet. I knew I wasn't a vengeful woman, but they had made me into one. They had forced me to stand at the door, waiting for love and respect that never came. Now the consequences of their choices were unfolding before them. There was no rush. There was no need to hurry or make a spectacle. I would wait quietly as the pieces began to move. The day I received the letter from the bank was calm, almost too calm. My little room with its bookshelves lined with stories of other times and the kettle softly bubbling on the stove remained unchanged, a comforting constant. It was in this space that I found solace, where everything had always felt simple. But as I held the letter in my hands, a strange sense of relief washed over me. It wasn't a letter filled with good news, but it was something far more significant, something final. I placed it on the table, unfolded the paper, and let the words settle into me. Everything I read was exactly as I had hoped. They didn't know it yet, but their dreams were already beginning to unravel. As I had anticipated, the bank now had every right to call in the mortgage, to demand full repayment due to the serious change in circumstances between the borrower and the guarantor me. That moment had finally arrived. While they were celebrating in their grand home, oblivious to the storm brewing just outside their door, I was already making my move. That night I couldn't sleep. Or rather, I wasn't sleeping. I sat at my small table surrounded by the familiar warmth of my home, but my mind was focused elsewhere. I went over the documents again meticulously, replaying every detail, every part of the plan I had set into motion. When I saw their address printed on the bank letter, my heart froze for a second. They had no idea. Not yet. I had already calculated everything, planned every step, and the next morning I would call them. But it wouldn't be to offer comfort. No, I was at peace with what I had done, and that was the victory I had longed for. The phone rang. It was Candace. Her voice, once so steady and composed, now trembled with panic. There was fear in her words, growing clearer with each syllable. She was trying to remain calm, trying to convince herself this was all some mistake. But I already knew what she didn't. This was no mistake. "Mama, are you serious? You couldn't have done this," she said, her voice shaking with dread. I stood there, rooted in the quiet certainty of my decision. Her words were laced with fear, and I felt a strange satisfaction watching her world start to crack. The same woman who had once relied on me, the woman who thought she could take everything I had to give, was now unraveling, just as I had predicted. And I wasn't going to save her this time. "I did what I had to do, Candace," I replied, my voice calm, devoid of the emotion I used to feel in moments like this. I had no need to explain myself any further. My decision was made and I wasn't going back. She stammered, trying to pull me back into her world of excuses, her voice growing more desperate. "Mama, please, I don't know what to do. We can't." But I wasn't listening anymore. I didn't need to hear her plea. Not after everything she had said to me, after the way she had pushed me aside. Now it was my turn to speak, to set the record straight. "You chose your path, my dear," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "Now you'll have to live with the consequences of your lies. I've already canceled my support. You should have lived with dignity, not lied and wriggled your way out of everything." I didn't wait for her to answer. I knew exactly what would be running through her mind, her world collapsing, her perfect house, her glossy life. Everything was slipping away. I felt the cold satisfaction of knowing that what I had done was not just an act of revenge, but the restoration of justice. She called again soon after, but I didn't answer. I had nothing left to say. No matter how hard she begged, no matter how many pleas she made, she had already lost everything. Her dream home, the status she craved, none of it would save her now. I sat quietly, knowing they were scrambling to find a way out of the trap I had set. The world I had helped build for her was falling apart piece by piece. Her life, the one she had chosen, was no longer so perfect. The walls she had carefully constructed from money, lies, and ambition were crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The chaos, the panic, it would all be theirs to face. I wouldn't be part of that world anymore. I was beyond it now, beyond them. My satisfaction didn't come from seeing them suffer, but from knowing that they had treated me as insignificant, as someone to be discarded when they had no use for me. Now they would learn the hard way that a mother's love, even when betrayed, is not something to be trifled with. I sat still, content. The quiet after the storm was always the most powerful part. I knew that the worst of it was still to come for them. It was only a matter of time before the weight of their greed and carelessness caught up to them, and they realized that nothing could save them now. The collapse of their plans had begun. I sat in my small living room, on the same old couch that had seen me through so many years of quiet struggles and weary nights. It was a strange feeling, peaceful but not in the way I used to know. The disappointment and anger that had once clouded my mind were now fading, replaced by a clear understanding of what I had done. They had thought I'd break down, that after being kicked out of their home, I would cry and hope everything would go back to how it was. But I wasn't that kind of woman. I had spent my whole life carrying burdens, hiding my pain behind a smile to make life better for others. But now I knew. No one deserved my unwavering devotion if they didn't value it. And that was the crux of it all. I wasn't waiting for them to come crawling back. I didn't need their apologies. I had given them everything, and yet they hadn't seen me, truly seen me, for who I was. But now I was done being invisible. I hadn't expected a phone call, but it came. His voice was as warm as it always was, usually calm, as if everything could be smoothed over with the right words. It was Peter, my daughter's husband. I didn't want to talk to him, but something inside me compelled me to pick up the phone. "Mama, I know everything hasn't gone the way we planned." He tried to sound calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of something else. Something like a forced kindness, the kind you use when you need to find the right words to fix a problem you didn't expect. "But please talk to Monica. She's really upset. She doesn't understand why you've made things so difficult." I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. Peter wasn't the kind of man who took responsibility for anything. He was part of the world that valued surface-level appearances more than true emotions, more than honesty. And I knew, this world was about to fall apart in front of their eyes. "Peter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the coldness seep through. "Do you really think I'm just going to come back and forget how they threw me out of their celebration?" Silence fell on the other end of the line. It stretched on longer than I expected. I didn't care about their apologies anymore, their attempts to explain away what had happened. I was so far past that now. I no longer needed them. I didn't need their choices. I had made mine and I wasn't looking back. "I understand your point of view," Peter said finally, his voice still full of doubt, still unsure. "We're ready to make things right. If you'd come back, we'll be waiting for you." I couldn't help but smile at that. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile of understanding, one that held no warmth. He didn't get it. "Not yet." "No, Peter," I replied, each word punctuated with the finality I had been carrying for days. "You've all chosen your path. I am no longer part of that world. And I'm not looking for a place in it anymore." The silence on the other end was telling. He didn't say anything else. He couldn't. He had finally realized that there was no going back. And I knew deep down that they hadn't yet realized what this would cost them. The true storm was still coming, and I was the only one who knew how it would end. The conversation ended, not with words of sympathy or apology, but with the understanding that I had made my choice. Peter had no words left to offer, and I knew that I had made the right decision. The world they had built, the one they had wanted me to be part of, had already started to slip away from them. They just didn't know how much they had lost. I set the phone down and looked around my small house. I wasn't angry anymore. There was no bitterness or regret. There was only calm. The decisions I had made, the sacrifices I had made in the past, had all led me here, quietly, with dignity, and now with strength. I went back to my old routine. I sat down on my couch again, this time sipping my tea. Time seemed to slow down for a moment, as though the world had paused. The shadows of doubt were gone. This was my moment. I had chosen a path of quiet strength. I had shown them all what it meant to be underestimated, to be the one left behind. Now they would understand what it meant when someone they thought was weak could change the course of their lives with a single decision. Their plans? Crumbling. The illusion they had built around themselves was starting to fade. And I was free. I wasn't chasing after their world anymore. It had never been mine. It was their turn to face the consequences. And I was content knowing they would. There is nothing more powerful than the sensation that you are in control of the events unfolding around you. And believe me, when I saw their faces the next day, it wasn't just a victory for me. It was confirmation that I had finally found the strength they had long ignored. After our last conversation, I felt my heart devoid of any lingering sorrow. I was no longer the old grandmother who could be easily brushed aside. Instead of hiding in the shadows, I had started to act. That morning, after speaking with Peter, I headed straight to the bank. The receptionist greeted me with that same indifferent politeness they reserve for people who are here with some standard small problem. But when I mentioned that I wanted to review the terms of their mortgage agreement, his expression shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. He had no idea that I already knew everything. His attempts to ask about changes in financial circumstances were nothing but distractions. I wasn't just a contract breaker. I was the one holding the key to their entire financial downfall. "Madam, you'll need to wait for a moment, I'll check the details," he began, trying to mask his discomfort. But I wasn't waiting. I already knew what had to be done. For all those years I had tried to remain unnoticed, to remain in the background, but now I had become an active participant in what was about to unfold. I was no longer the passive observer. I had become the force that would reshape everything. The next day the letter arrived. I didn't need to see their faces to know what was inside. I knew the moment I saw the envelope. It was the final blow to their carefully constructed world. My daughter didn't even have to open it to know that their beautiful house was nothing more than an illusion. Reading that letter, I felt a rush, but not of triumph, of finality. I had watched her flaunt her perfect life, her immaculate home, all built on my sacrifice. And now, with a simple stroke of the pen, I had ensured that it would all fall apart. I didn't need to be with them anymore. I had already created my own reality, a reality where I was no longer the giver, but the one in control. Their world, full of pretense and lies, no longer had a place for someone like me. I felt her attempts at calling me again. She wanted to talk, to apologize, perhaps to beg. But I didn't pick up the phone. Her words no longer had weight. I had already proven everything I needed to prove. This wasn't a quick, impulsive revenge. No, it was a cold and calculated decision, one that had been brewing for years. The satisfaction that followed wasn't in their immediate destruction. It was in the realization that I had reclaimed control. I had been the one who gave everything for them, but now I had stopped giving. Now I was a woman who knew exactly what needed to be done to take back what was mine. The past had taught me everything, and I knew that in this world, respect wasn't something you begged for. It was something you earned, and in that moment I had taken it back. When I saw my daughter next, she was no longer the woman who had smiled with such pride at her grand house. Now she was facing the reality of what I had set in motion. As I stood there watching them prepare to sell the house, I felt something shift inside me. A sense of quiet triumph, one that wasn't born from bitterness but from justice. Her dream, her world was crumbling. And in that moment I knew it wasn't just revenge. It was the reclaiming of my dignity, the validation of my strength. It was my victory, my justice. Watching her struggle to keep it all together, trying to salvage the life she thought was unshakable, was all the confirmation I needed. The house was going up for sale. They had no choice but to admit the truth. They were losing everything they had built on lies. And I was standing on the other side, watching the wreckage with quiet satisfaction. From time to time I would think about how everything had changed. How I drove to that grand, shining house, hoping to restore the bond between us, hoping for a simple meeting with my daughter, the one who had long since disappeared behind the horizon of her perfect, glamorous reality. But it was all just an illusion. What I felt was more than just pain and loss when I saw their faces that day. Now I understood why I had always remained alone in my small, quiet world. What they didn't understand, and what they would eventually pay the highest price for, was that I had regained control of my own life. Not just through the mortgage I had canceled, but through the internal renewal I had undergone. I was no longer dependent on what they chose to give or not give me. They could no longer convince me that I wasn't important. I had already shown them who truly held the reins. That evening I received a call from them. Of course I knew it would come. It was inevitable. My daughter, usually so stubborn and always in control, was now trying to sound as if she were begging, as though she had fallen from that high pedestal she had placed herself on. I couldn't bear to listen to her apologies, her panicked attempts to turn things back, as if nothing had happened. "Mama, please, we really need your help." Her voice trembled with desperation. And I felt something inside me grow cold. Instead of feeling guilt or sympathy, I realized that they no longer had a place in my life. They could no longer manipulate me. I had already felt that power, the power that comes from the realization that I could now decide my own fate. I was no longer simply at their beck and call, waiting to fulfill their every whim. I answered the phone calmly, even with a touch of harshness. "This isn't just a mistake, my dear. This was my decision. And this decision is final." The silence on the other end of the line was oppressive, like those darkest moments when words can't describe what you truly feel. They were left with only the impressions they had carried with them their whole lives, while I felt their system begin to crumble. Their proud, extravagant life was now falling apart in front of their eyes. I hung up the phone, but I didn't move right away. I sat there, processing everything that had happened. I was no longer the woman who feared losing her family. I had taken control, and they understood that they could never again use me as their crutch. Now I looked at them and realized that their luxurious life was nothing but a facade, one that had crumbled with the smallest blow. And it wasn't me who was weak. No, now I was the one who held the power. It was in that moment that I truly understood. The true measure of strength doesn't come from what you give to others, but from what you take back for yourself. I had spent my life giving, offering my time, my sacrifices, my everything for them. But now I had taken that back. I had reasserted myself as the one who deserved respect and consideration. As I thought about it, I realized that the house, the money, the parties, they were all just distractions, carefully crafted illusions to mask the emptiness underneath. They had never understood the true value of what I had given them. But now they were beginning to see the truth. The truth that it wasn't their world that had control, it was mine. I had allowed them to think that they were the ones with the power, that they were the ones in charge. But all it had taken was one decision, one shift, and now they were the ones who were vulnerable. And as they scrambled to regain control, I sat back, calm, knowing that they would never again see me as the weak, compliant woman they had once known. I was no longer at their mercy. I had found my own path, one that led me away from their illusions and into a reality of my own making. Their world was crumbling, and it was no longer my problem. They would learn what it meant to depend on someone who had long since stopped being their support. They would have to face the consequences of their choices, and for the first time in my life, I would not be there to pick up the pieces. It was the collapse of everything they had built, and I had no intention of saving them this time. Their luxury, their facade, it was all gone, and I was the one who had made it fall apart. I stood strong, knowing that I was no longer the one standing in the shadows. Now I was the one with the strength, the power, the control. It was their turn to face the reality of their own making. And I was free. My victory wasn't in the sounds of the winds ripping apart their perfect world, but in the peace I felt within myself. I had finally seen what I had longed for. Not their recognition, not their apologies or even their money, but a deep, unwavering understanding that I no longer had to sacrifice my dignity for the sake of others. My time had come, and that time didn't belong to them. Weeks passed since their world began to crumble. They were forced to sell the house they had so proudly built on my back. And although I wasn't there to witness it, I knew what had happened. Their beautiful illusion had vanished. And I continued to live my quiet little life. My house still smelled of old wood, and on the table there was only the best, a cup of tea and the silence that I no longer feared. And then the letter came. My hands trembled slightly as I saw it. It was from the law firm representing my daughter and her husband. They were asking to meet and discuss next steps. I smiled, knowing it was just a matter of time before this moment arrived. When we finally met, I could see the pain and despair in their eyes, but there was also something else. An understanding that I had been right. This wasn't just revenge. It was the price they had to pay for how they had treated me all these years. I sat at the table, calm and silent, watching them, and I could feel how their attempts to apologize were meaningless. I didn't need their apologies. "Mama, we don't understand how everything happened so fast," my daughter said. her voice barely holding together. You don't understand how it happened, I replied with full clarity. But I understand. And I'm no longer willing to be a tool in your life. You thought you could silence me, but that's not the case. All these years you tried to build your perfect world on my back. I'm no longer your foundation. I'm no longer your support. I didn't need to say more. My decision was final. They had already lost everything. And that was my victory. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I wasn't hurt. I was as calm as I had ever been. I was no longer part of their world, and they could no longer manipulate me. Now, sitting in the silence of my home, I understood that although I had lost my connection with my daughter, I had gained the most valuable thing, my right to self-respect. I no longer depended on them. I was no longer just a tool in their game. This victory wasn't about their losses. It was about the freedom I had regained. Freedom from their demands, freedom from their sense of superiority. And you know what? That was the best feeling in the world.
Thanks for watching. Bye bye.